Hello everybody, welcome to this talking point. I can see people gradually entering the room. We're up to about 30 participants so far. Welcome everybody. I don't know about where you are, but London today is very grey, so what better day for logging on and hearing about some of Centrepoint's vital work. So thank you so much for joining us. It looks to me like we're holding, no we're not, we're still going up. We're at 39 people now, still coming through. And I think we're pausing at early 40s now. Great. I think it looks like we're slowing, so I think we can probably kick off. If others join as we are live, then that's all good. Brilliant. Well, my name is Di Gornall. I'm the Director of Fundraising at Centrepoint, and it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you today to this session, this talking point session. I'm delighted that we have Paul Brocklehurst with us, who is going to be talking to us about Centrepoint's helpline, and particularly highlighting how the helpline have had to respond to the current COVID-19 crisis. So thank you so much, Paul, for being with us today. Paul is going to give us his overview, and then at the end of that we will be taking questions. If you have questions, you should see a Q&A button. I'll be keeping an eye on that, and once Paul has finished talking, then we'll come back to the Q&A and answer any questions that you have. We won't be hand raising or chatting in the session, just pop everything through the Q&A function. That would be great, and I'll make sure that we field those questions at the end of the session. Just to introduce who's on the call today as well, I know we've invited lots of people who have been hugely generous in their support of Centrepoint. A massive thank you to you, not just for obviously being on the call today, but all your generosity in supporting Centrepoint's work. And I know that we've got some people on the call who specifically have supported the helpline. So I hope that you will find this session really relevant to the gifts that you've generously given to Centrepoint. So enormous thanks to you. I think then, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Paul. He's going to share his screen with us, and then we will kick off with his presentation. So over to you. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you, Di. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Hopefully I can get my screen up.
Yeah, it's there, Paul. Well done. Thank you.
Excellent. Made that. Great. Okay, so I run the Centrepoint helpline. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what the helpline does if you've not heard much about us before, and who contacts us. But then also focus quite a lot on what's been changing over the last 3 months as we've faced our own challenges around the coronavirus and what that's looked like for us on the helpline. Okay, so Centrepoint helpline has been running for about 3 years now, which is still relatively new for a national helpline. But since then, we've supported over 16,000 young people in a huge variety of different circumstances right the way across England. We've expanded to a second office in Manchester. We've launched a web chat service, and we also recently were accredited by the Helpline's Partnership Quality Standard, which shows that we're following best practice for a helpline. What we're there to do is provide information, advice and support for under 25s that are homeless or at risk of homelessness. That can vary depending on people's circumstances, but our typical call is when a young person has been kicked out of their home for the first time. Very often they've not had to take control of their housing situation before. They don't have any experience around tenancies and landlords and contracts and deposits, or even going to the council. They don't necessarily know what support's available for them. And we help them through that process. Sometimes they are literally on their doorstep, having just been kicked out. They've either heard about us from a friend or found us online. They're giving us a call and saying, I don't have anywhere to stay tonight. I don't know what to do next. And we talk them through that situation. We talk them through what's going on for them and what they can do next. So in terms of how people find themselves homeless and contact us, one of the biggest areas is family breakdown. So for whatever reason, the young person isn't getting on with the people at home, whether that's parents or guardians, and that reaches a point where they're told to leave, or the young person feels that they can't leave, so they can't stay. This can be on a huge variety of different issues. Sometimes that can be the parents have an issue with the young person's sexuality, and that results in arguments forcing the young person to leave. There was one case where for cultural issues, the family didn't feel comfortable with the young person going out. I think they were seen out dancing at night, and that caused a huge problem in their family. Sometimes it can be about substance abuse with their parents. So there can be a huge amount of different issues, but fundamentally it boils down to things at home aren't good and the young person's forced to leave. In some of the more serious cases, that can also involve fleeing violence or abuse. We do get a significant number where either the young person is the direct victim of domestic abuse, or they're in a household where domestic abuse is taking place and they don't feel safe there anymore. Less common, but it also still comes up at perhaps the older age range for us, 23, 24, 25, is where they are living with their partner. Again, the relationship breaks down for whatever reason, but the young person may not have any legal right to be in that property. They may not be on the tenancy. And again, they very quickly find themselves homeless. And another one that comes up sometimes is when there's a death of a family member, particularly if that's the person that's bringing in the income or is on the tenancy. That can result in the young person's housing situation changing very rapidly. So to give you a quick example of the sorts of things that we deal with, I'll give you a story about a young lady called Jenny. And Jenny contacted us through the Centipoid website. So she initially contacted us by email. She was 16 and she'd been sleeping rough in a park, on a park bench for a little while. She was 3 months pregnant, and because of that, she'd fallen out with her family and felt that she had to leave. One of the things she told us was that she had no adults in her life that she could ask for any sort of help, and she was very scared. She didn't know anything, her rights or what she was entitled to, and that's why it had taken a long time for her to ask for help. Because of her age, we focused on getting her in touch with social services. We explained how she would be able to contact them for an assessment and what they would do. And back at the time we took this call, it was a case of physically going into the council offices for that process. So we explained all that to her. We texted her the address, made sure she knew how to get there, and she was able to get there okay. And off she went. When she was in the waiting room at the council offices, she emailed us again saying that she was really worried about what would happen. She was worried they would just send her home to her family. So we were able to continue that support while she was in the waiting room. We were able to continue to make contact and provide her that reassurance. And following that assessment with social services, she was able to get emergency accommodation for that evening. So I think for me, one of the key things about the helpline is, yes, we provide information about people's rights and how the system works in terms of accessing housing, but it's also providing that reassurance and support every step of the way for people that have got a lot going on for them. They've never had to think about this before. They're not used to dealing with the bureaucracy of housing systems, and we help them make what can be a really difficult time a little bit easier. Which brings us on to something that's made everyone's life harder, which is the coronavirus. So I think for the helpline, things really started to change when the lockdown first came into place. We immediately relocated our teams from working in our London and Manchester offices to working at home. Obviously, that required a little bit of changing to our technology and rerouting some phones, but thankfully we had disaster recovery processes that we could follow, and that aspect was set up quite quickly. We didn't close the helpline at all. We were able to go from working in the office one day to everyone working from home. Probably the biggest challenge we've had in working from home, though, is the impact and support for our team. One of the great things about being in the office is how everyone supports each other. You can half listen into a call and you can tell when somebody's on a very serious call, perhaps dealing with domestic abuse or forced marriage or one of the many issues that comes up for us. And people can very quickly offer that bit of support, talk it through with their colleagues. And also, I mean, we're very much fueled on tea. There's a huge value in saying, go and get your cup of tea. And that's something that all the team value. People at home now, it's a lot harder for us to offer that support. It's a lot harder for us to pick up when somebody's on a difficult call. So we're having to push that a little bit more, checking in with everyone a lot more. We now have our team video calls rather than team meetings. And we've also arranged for additional support sessions with the Centrepoint psychology team as well, to give people a chance to debrief on how they're feeling at a time when things are pretty crazy out there. But then the other aspect is the demand and the people calling us and the types of calls we're getting has changed. Probably what's most striking is there's a huge amount of calls coming in. But also, again, particularly that lockdown point was a real change. We heard from a lot more people that becoming unemployed, perhaps shortly before the furlough scheme was launched. A lot of young people working sectors that have been heavily affected, like retail and hospitality, and a lot of them lost their job and their income and put them at risk of homelessness. The other big impact we've seen is going back to what I was saying before about family breakdown being the biggest cause. All of a sudden, families were told to stay at home, and for quite a lot of young people, that isn't a good environment to be stuck in. That exacerbated pressures at home, and the times when people maybe felt they could get outside for a few hours, that became a lot harder. And that resulted in this pressure cooker environment and a lot more people being kicked out. What we've seen is calls increased by nearly 60% post-lockdown to pre-lockdown, which is a huge amount and has been very challenging for us to adapt to. As I say, a lot of that has been, a lot of people's circumstances have changed, but people are also finding that they're under that much more pressure as well. And the other big aspect is that there's a lot less support. So part of what we do is we work in partnership with a lot of services that have a physical presence. So it might be that we can send somebody to a drop-in centre in Brighton and give them the address, tell them the opening times, and they're able to make their way there and perhaps get some food, get a shower, and get some regular support for the next steps. Most of those services are currently closed. They're slowly starting to think about reopening, but we've probably got a little while yet. So that means there's a lot less support out there. I think that also means that more people are calling us because any other services they may have previously gone to aren't operating. So that again is meaning that we're getting contacted by a lot more people. And to finish with, I want to give you an example of one of the calls we've taken since lockdown that perhaps illustrates some of the issues. We were contacted by Alicia, and she initially fled abuse at home when she was under 18. And she'd really been sofa surfing pretty much since then. She'd never really had any stable accommodation since then, but she'd always managed to get by. She'd perhaps stay with friends for a couple of weeks at a time before moving on. But more or less, she was okay with that. It's certainly far from ideal circumstances, but coping. Unfortunately, as lockdown kicked in and people were told to be careful about who they're letting into their homes, she found that she was no longer able to find friends that would let her stay there, and she was at risk of street homelessness. She managed already to try and contact the council for support, but again, like every other service, the council were still adapting to the circumstances. They weren't allowing physical presentations, and she found it very difficult to get through on the phones. She was finding that the calls were being diverted to an emergency team, but no one ever called her back. But she managed to speak to us, and we were able to, again, offer her that reassurance and support her through difficult circumstances. And we were able to find a way to actually reach the council and get her an assessment. So yeah, there's lots going on. More people are finding themselves in difficult circumstances, and those difficult circumstances are a lot harder to get out of at the moment because there's a lot less support out there. So crazy times. That's a very quick overview. I'm happy to answer all questions that you have. Over to you, Di.
Paul, thank you so much for what a comprehensive overview of the work that our helpline has been doing over the last, well, historically, but also importantly over the last couple of months. Thank you so much for that great overview. Let's start with some questions. If you do have questions, please just pop them onto the Q&A. But we'll start with this one that's come through, Paul, which is about the call volumes and demand going forward through this year, and how you think the helpline will need to continue respond to call volumes.
Yeah, I don't think anyone knows what's going to be happening in 6 months' time. I have to say that I'm quite worried and preparing for us to be very busy. I think there's a few things coming up that are going to add to that pressure. I think when the furlough scheme ends, we're expecting there to be more redundancies, more people laid off. But also, what was I going to say? Also, I think what we're seeing as well is there's a huge amount of young people, particularly, that are claiming universal credit now that previously weren't. That's jumped up, I think, over 100% in the last few weeks. There was something came out, I think, earlier this week about that. The other aspect as well that I'm keeping a close eye on is the private sector evictions. Now, I was saying, most of our callers tend not to even reach the stage where they're in private sector accommodation. But that does feel like that's another thing coming on the horizon, that at some point that moratorium on evictions is going to turn off. And I'm quite concerned about what exactly that's going to mean for homelessness services, as everyone's going to be very busy at that point. But also for young people who, again, may find themselves very quickly in difficult situation. So yeah, unfortunately, I'm preparing for a very busy year. I think going back to the team and supporting the team, I think we're looking at a point of view is like, we can't be preparing as this is going to be 3 weeks of really difficult and then things will be back to normal. It's like, how do we work in a way that we can keep doing this? How can we be sustainable with it? Make sure that people have got the support in place so that we can keep going. Because yeah, I think it's going to be difficult for a long time.
Thank you, Paul. So our next question is around whether you're seeing spikes of calls or whether they are plateauing. So the actual question is, has the spike of calls to the helpline decreased somewhat? How is it looking now?
I think there's perhaps been a slight decrease. I was saying, I mean, we still are getting days which are busier than any other day we've had. We've stopped counting it really. It used to be that it was a big deal to have the busiest ever day. Now it seems like that happens quite regularly. I think, yeah, it's probably not growing as much anymore. It is probably plateauing, but as I say, looking at one eye on the future, I'm not quite sure how things are going to pan out going forward.
Thank you. We've got a question around suicidal calls, Paul. Have the helpline seen an increase in those contemplating suicide?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think we have, but that's purely because we don't get many at all anyway. There's probably one or two a year that we get that are acutely suicidal. That does involve us calling emergency services. It's quite rare for us to get those calls. That said, mental health is definitely an issue that comes up quite a lot. Anecdotally, I think mental health issues and people feeling anxious and frustrated is probably going up. I think it's purely that people that are feeling suicidal wouldn't tend to call us, that we haven't seen an increase specifically in suicidal, but definitely other helplines are seeing that. And yeah, again, I think it's a symptom of the difficult times we're going through.
Tom, we have somebody on the call who would like to support the helpline, and they're specifically talking about how corporate partners can help. He asks whether there is a role to share the awareness of the helpline and what the helpline is doing in terms of helping cope with call volume, but also a question around recruitment for the helpline, and are there ways that corporate partners could assist on that?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for offering to help. I think that's hugely valuable. It's really weird. If you'd asked me 3 months ago, then absolutely the focus would be promote the service. We had a brilliant service, but not enough people were calling us. We had a little bit of capacity and we wanted to raise awareness. At the moment, we're not doing any marketing activity, but at the same time, absolutely, I think cautiously spreading the word, posting on your social media accounts, letting your customers know about our services and your employees know, then absolutely that's brilliant. As part of building our capacity, we are looking at doing some more volunteer recruitment, particularly based in Manchester. We have some volunteers that are based in London, but we don't currently have any in Manchester. Right now, we're in the process of recruiting some new staff. So kind of want to get through that process, get the staff team a bit more settled, but we'll be looking to recruit for more volunteers probably later in the summer. And again, I'm sure we'll be in touch with all the corporate partners for ways that they can promote that to their staff and employees and customers.
That would be great. Thank you. And Tom also had this question around remote working and whether the helpline is able to continue to remote work going forwards, given, you know, the rise in future demand, if the physical space back in the office is constrained.
It's interesting. I've always been quite hesitant about home working, and I think it's precisely because of that huge value of peer support and having people in the office. It makes it that much easier. But it works for us. We've been doing it for 3 months, and we'll probably do it for another 3 months at least before things get back to normal. I suspect we'll perhaps move towards some sort of hybrid of people still being office-based a lot of the time, but having that bit extra flexibility if people feel like they need to be working from home or they want to work from home for a couple of days a week, then that's definitely something we can facilitate. Manchester, We're in the process of refurbishing our Oldham Street property. As part of that, that's going to have an increased capacity. So I expect we'll be able to make the best use of that when that's ready. At the moment, yeah, I don't think space is a particular issue. And I'd say, yeah, I think we'll be looking to make best use of home working, but at the same time, I desperately miss going into the office and seeing people and talking about what was on TV last night and being able to huddle a bit more than we've been able to do virtually.
Yeah, agreed. How many people, the question is how many people populate the helpline? My guess is that's about how many people you have in your team, Paul.
Yeah, so we have 7 full-time employees, including myself, 2 based in Manchester and the rest based in London. And we're then supported by, I think at the moment it's about 15 volunteers that are currently London based. We'll be, as I say, looking to expand the volunteer offer into Manchester soon.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of questions about volunteering on the helpline and whether you need specialist training and what sort of commitment you would be looking for, Paul.
Sure. So we give all the training. As part of our selection process of volunteering, we are looking for people that are good listeners and communicators, that are able to show empathy. But we do train people through all the knowledge bits, particularly all the housing law and how to access the council services and what options are available. We provide support and training through all that. I think for the volunteer commitment, the main thing is we are looking for people to do 1 shift a week, which is normally half a day. The reason for that is because it helps maintain your knowledge and make sure that we're getting a good return on the training, essentially. One of the challenges we have is the helpline is open Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So volunteers will need to be able to give that commitment during those hours. So unfortunately, we know that rules out a lot of people. And I think even the most generous of our corporate partners probably couldn't spare half a day a week of their employees. So unfortunately, we know that. We do constantly review our opening hours, and it may be in the future that we're able to expand into the early evening or weekends. I don't expect that to happen in the next 12 months or so, though, especially with everything going on. So yeah, I think the main requirement for volunteering is to be able to be free during the working day. Fortunately, we do have a pool of either self-employed people or semi-retired or students that works very well for. Obviously, if there's other ways that you can support us, we'd be very interested and open to those suggestions. At the moment, we don't have any formal volunteer offering for anything else, but it may be that there are other approaches that are useful. Also, I'm sure Di will tell you all about the many volunteering opportunities offered with the fundraising team as well.
Yeah. Great, thank you, Paul. And yeah, do drop us a line if you would like to know more about volunteering more generally. 2 more questions and then we will close this session. One, Paul, for you and one probably for me. Have you seen a change in the age or demographic of the people that are contacting the helpline since the coronavirus crisis?
I don't think so particularly. I mean, I guess we probably get more over 25s contacting us now because again, it's harder to get through the services for over 25s. We manage those carefully. We don't just say, no, sorry, you're too old, go and bother someone else. We try and offer some basic support at the same time. Because we're so busy, we have to focus on the under 25s, but within our 16 to 25 target audience, I've not particularly noticed any significant changes. I think it remains challenging for everyone.
But we monitor those sorts of demographics, don't we, Paul? So as we go forward, once we do reviews, we will be able to see if that changes over time.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, I mean, speculatively, it may well be that perhaps there's an age group that's more affected by job losses, and that will impact on people contacting us. But yeah, at the moment, we don't have that, but we have all the data ready and waiting to be analysed.
Great, thanks, Paul. So this last question is about the 750 million support package that the Treasury has offered to charities and whether Centrepoint has benefited from that. We hope to, but not in a huge way. That 750 million has been broken down a lot and is being given to a number of different organisations in order for it to be distributed, including Mind, for example, for mental health. And we have found out that we've successfully benefited from some of that money, which is good. It's also going via the National Lottery. So we are putting an application into the National Lottery. But the great majority of that money, Centrepoint unfortunately doesn't qualify for. So a lot of it is around, for example, domestic abuse, some of it directly rather than through Centrepoint, and other criteria, for example, in terms of the amount of turnover that you might have within your organisation impacts on whether we're allowed to apply. So quite a lot of it is for smaller organisations, which wouldn't be relevant for Centrepoint. So we are applying where we're able to, and we certainly hope to benefit from some of it. We know that we've benefited to a small degree so far, and we would hope to have a successful National Lottery application as well. In which case, I think we're 2 minutes over our time allocated, so I am going to draw things to a close. I would like to say that it is only thanks to the generosity of our supporters that we are able to run the helpline, which obviously gives real vital support, often at a time of crisis for young people. So huge thanks for everybody and all your support that you've given to Centrepoint. It's hugely appreciated. Paul, thank you so much for your time today, and thank you to everybody for logging in and hearing from Paul. It's great to have you online, and I hope that you found it helpful. There will be, I think when you exit, there may well be a quick survey for you to complete just to say whether it's been useful or not. I would encourage you to answer those questions. But for now, that's all. Thank you so much for dialing in, and I wish you a very lovely rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.